Assalamualaikum and hello. Today we will present about our chosen question, which is question 7. Syarikat Doraemon is a well-known furniture company. Norbita, who operate a tuition school, purchased 20 tables and 20 chairs from the company. He was given a credit period of 20 days. The company delivered 20 tables to set and promised to send the chairs later. However, Norbita failed to pay after the 10 days period ended. Advised Syarikat Doraemon as to their rights as the unpaid seller.
Now, for the issue, the scenario given raised several legal issues under the Sale of Goods Act 1957. Firstly, whether Syarikat Doraemon can sue Nobita under Section 55 of the Act for failing to pay for the goods within the 20 days credit term. Secondly, whether the company has the right of lien over the remaining goods which have not yet been delivered as a form of protection for non-payment. Lastly, it must be considered whether Syarikat Doraemon is entitled to resell the undelivered goods if Nobita continue to default on the payment. Now, let's move on to the law involved in this situation. The case between Syarikat Doraemon and Nobita falls under the Sale of Goods Act 1957, specifically under the topic of remedies for breach of contract by the buyer. According to Act, buyer is said to breach the contract in three main situations. First is under Section 44, failure to take delivery. This section applies when the seller is ready and willing to deliver the goods, but the buyer fails or refuses to take a delivery after being requested. If this happens, the buyer is liable to the seller for any loss or additional costs caused by the delay. Second is under Section 56, failure to accept goods. Here, if the buyer wrongfully refuses to accept the goods or make payment, the seller has the right to claim damage. The amount of compensation is based on the actual loss suffered by the seller as a result of the buyer refusal. Third, and the most relevant to this case, is under Section 55, failure to pay for goods. This section allows the seller to sue the buyer for the price of the goods when ownership or property in the good has already passed to the buyer and the buyer refuses to pay, or when the price is due on a fixed date, even if the goods have not yet been delivered.
Before we explain the seller's rights, it's important to first understand who is considered as unpaid seller under the law. According to Section 45 of the Sale of Goods Act 1957, a seller is considered unpaid in two situations. First, when the whole price has not been paid or tendered. This means that if the buyer has not made full payment as agreed in the contract, whether before or after delivery, the seller legally becomes an unpaid seller. Second, when the buyers give a negotiable instrument such as a check or a bill of exchange, but it gets dishonoured. In this case, even though the seller accepted a form of payment, if that payment fails, for example, if the check bounces, the seller is still treated as unpaid under the law. Now, let's proceed. to the rights of unpaid seller. A. Rights of an unpaid seller against the goods, or also named as rights in rem. First, right of lien. Under Section 46, subsection 1A and Section 47, subsection 1, the seller who remains in possession of goods is entitled to retain them until payment is made. This right arises when goods are sold on credit and credit term has expired, or when the buyer becomes insolvent. The legal lien is valid even if ownership of the goods has passed to the buyer, as long as the seller still physically holds the goods. Second, right of stoppage in transit. Under Section 50, if the goods are already in transit and the buyer is declared insolvent, the seller can stop the delivery. However, this right is not applicable here, since the remaining chairs are still with Syarikat Doramon and not yet in transit. And the last one, right of resale. Under Section 54, subsection 2, if the buyer fails to pay within a reasonable time after notice, the unpaid seller has the right to resell the goods. This remedy is especially applicable when the seller gives clear notice to the buyer and no payment is made within the given time. Moreover, under Section 54, subsection 4, the seller has the rights to resell the goods if the original contract contains an express clause allowing it.
Alright, now I will explain the rights of an unpaid seller against the buyer, specifically focusing on the rights in personam, which means rights directly against the buyer, not the goods. So, firstly, we have right to sue for the price. Under the Sale of Goods Act 1957, sellers are protected when buyers fail to pay for goods. The relevant law here is Section 55, which has two parts. Under Section 55, subsection 1, if the ownership or property in the goods has passed to the buyer and the buyer refuses to pay, the seller can sue for the price. For example, if the table delivered by Syarikat Dora Moon were already under Norbita's ownership and he failed to pay, the company could sue him for the price. And then the second point, Section 55, subsection 2, applies when the price is payable on a specific date and the buyer neglects to pay. In this case, the seller can still sue for the price even if the goods haven't been delivered yet. So in our case, because only the table were delivered and the checks were still pending, Syarikat Dora Moon cannot yet sue under Section 55 since the full delivery has not been made and ownership over the whole batch of goods has not completely passed. Alright, so next we moving on to the next point, which right to sue for damages. Next, we look at the right to sue for damages under Section 56. This section applies if the buyer refuses to accept and pay for the goods. The seller, in this case, can claim damages for non-acceptance. The damages are calculated using Section 74 of the Contracts Act 1950 and the common law rule from the case of Hadley versus Bazendel, sub 1854. The rule says compensation must be for losses that naturally arise or were reasonably foreseeable at the time of contract. So in our group scenario, if Norbita continues to refuse to pay, syarikat Doraemon may not be able to sue for the full price yet, but they can definitely sue for the damages under Section 56 due to non-payment and non-acceptance.
Okay, firstly, syarikat Doraemon may sue Norbita under Section 55 for the price of the 20 tables that have already been delivered. Since the ownership light passed upon delivery and the 20 days credit term has expired, the seller has the right to recover the price as a debt. Norbita's failure to pay within the agreed period constitutes a breach of contract, and the company is not obligated to wait any further. Secondly, the company still has physical possession of the 20 chairs, which were promised to be delivered later. Under Section 46(1)(a) and Section 47(1)(b), Syarikat Doraemon can exercise its right of lien and legally withhold delivery of the remaining chairs. The right of lien is a crucial remedy here because the seller still hold the goods and can use them as leverage to prompt payment. Thirdly, if Norbita continues to delay or refuse payment after being notified, Syarikat Doraemon may exercise the right of resale under Section 54(2). The company must provide reasonable notice to the buyer of its intention to resell. If Norbita fails to pay within that time, Syarikat Doraemon can resell the goods and recover losses from the breach. This ensures that the company is not left at a financial disadvantage due to buyer's default. Lastly, if the situation amounts to a wrongful refusal to pay or accept further goods, the seller may also claim damage under Section 56 for non-acceptance. The court will assess damage using principle from Hadley v. Baxendale, focusing on losses that naturally arise from the breach or were within the contemplation of both parties at the time of conclusion. Based on the Sale of Goods Act 1957, Syarikat Doraemon has several legal remedies. As an unpaid seller, the company may sue for the price of the 20 tables under Section 55, as ownership has slightly passed. It also has the right of lien over the 20 chairs still in its possession and may withhold with delivery until full payment is made. Furthermore, if Norbita continues to default after being given notice, the company may resell the chairs under Section 54. Additionally, the company may be entitled to claim damage under Section 56 for Norbita's non-payment. This legal provision provides comprehensive protection to sellers like Syarikat Doraemon when facing a breach of contract by the buyer.